Welcome to another episode of Mad in Germany. I'm joined today by Melina Borčak, who is a best-selling author and journalist, author of Mecca Here, Mecca Da on anti-Muslim racism. Hi, Melina. Thanks for coming today.
Hi, Salam.
So today I wanted to talk to you about Islamophobia, or as you call it, anti-Muslim racism. You've just been doing a tour around Germany. Your book was a Spiegel bestseller on this particular issue. So what is it about?
Well, first of all, I have to distance myself from Spiegel because, as we know, Muslims have to distance themselves all the time. So it's about linguistic and media framing that makes people hate Muslims. I chose this topic because anti-Muslim racism, it's a pretty wide thing. It can go from compliments that are meant to be nice but have a racist core, over like everyday racism, and all the way to genocides against Muslims. So I was thinking like you could either take each of those things apart, or you could go to the core and see how are Muslims talked about, reported about, thought about, what's the things that are going wrong, what's the stuff that's going right, how can we do it more. So that's why I chose to analyze language, because language forms the way we think, forms our thoughts form our behavior, and behavior forms our society.
Can you give me an example of how language frames anti-Muslim racism, as you call it?
Well, first of all, for example, moderate Muslims. Why do we say moderate Muslims all the time? It kind of implies that, Muslims are only acceptable and only okay if they're kind of moderate, if they're like under control, if they're not really totally Muslim, but like the acceptable kind. Because we don't say that about other communities, and also the whole like Islamism thing. What's even the definition of that? If you ask people about the definition, it's like, political Islam. Okay, political Islam can be anything from like Islamic feminists who use the Quran and the Hadith to say, these are my rights as a woman and you can't take that away from me, all the way to like Daesh, which is like so fucking insane that even Al-Qaeda has distanced themselves from Daesh or like ISIS. Like even Al-Qaeda is saying they are an embarrassment to extremism. So you're putting those people in the same group as Islamic feminists. It's insane. And like you wouldn't say that some cute granny in a village in Guatemala who is like super Catholic because that's what's giving her strength in her life is the same as Joseph Kony. You would never put them in the same category. But for Muslims, it's like...
That's quite a millennial reference there, Joseph Kony.
Yeah, I was like...
I don't know if even
2012
anymore. Kony 2012, yeah.
Yeah. But of course, Christians have done so much shit all over the world. I could get a million other references, but I just thought that's one that's like most famous because Christian shit isn't talked about so much. We'll get later to like the Bosnian genocide.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an interesting point. I do wonder about this constant like reporting on Islamism that you get in Germany, and it's always used as a problematic framing, right? And I've really tried to get to the bottom of what it means, because if you say, I believe in free speech, I don't necessarily think that mosques should be shut down by the Interior Ministry without any court ruling, for example, as recently happened in the so-called Blue Mosque in Hamburg, which, the Interior Ministry said that there were some links with the Iranian regime, and everyone kind of clapped for them because they're Islamists, and Islamists are apparently the enemy, but we never quite define what Islamists are. I think it just means Islamic extremists. Is that a term you would use?
Well, that also depends, because I'm just saying just treat us like everybody else, because the core of racism is double standards. So with Christians, you have Christian fundamentalists, you have evangelicals, you have extremists of all kinds, you have conservative Christians, which are not, like treated as demons or something. I mean, for me personally, I don't like political parties that have like religious stuff in them, because no country except maybe the Vatican is like 100% the same religion. But at the same time, if we can have the Christian Democrats in Germany and in all these other countries, why couldn't we have the Muslim version of that?
The Muslim Brotherhood.
The thing is, for example, if we take the Christian Democrats in Germany, Merkel and all the Christian Democrats were against gay marriage. They were not even like labeled as homophobic, let alone as like Christismus, like, you know, Islamism and Christism.
And Germany was, of course, one of
Christism.
the last countries, or most recent countries in Western Europe, at least, to have allowed gay marriage. So
Yeah.
this was, you know, people were talking about how liberal Germany was under Merkel, but it was actually, you know, one of the last countries to allow gay marriage.
And she was against it.
She was against
And
it.
nobody says she's homophobic and they are homophobic. Her whole party is homophobes because they are so Christian and they are like political Christianity and Christism and so on. Nobody was saying that.
Of course,
But
there's the
at the
Kreuzpflicht in Bayern as well. There's actually all public buildings have to have a crucifix in them, which was brought in by Markus Söder when he became the new minister president of Bayern.
See, and at the same time, in those same schools, you can't work as a teacher if you wear the hijab, but you can work as a cleaner if you wear the hijab in the same school where there is a crucifix. And they say you can't work as a teacher there with the hijab because neutrality and we got to be neutral, but you not just can have a crucifix, you have to have a crucifix in the school. And also you can work as a teacher there if you're a Nazi. Like Björn Höcke is still registered as a history teacher, one of the leaders of the far-right AfD, registered as a history teacher. We have genocide deniers working as university professors in Germany. Nobody's talking about neutrality. I would not trust them to like be fair to me when they're giving grades or whatever to me or to my imaginary like future children who will of course be the smartest. Like I don't trust those people. And I think neutrality is important, you know, when you're a teacher or something. But at the same time, we have like constant studies that have like, for example, if there's a test that like is completely the same mistakes, the same amount of mistakes, the same handwriting, everything's the same by Max and by Murat. Max gets a better grade than Murat, like 1 grade above, with the same results. So if you have a Muslim kid having the same results as a German kid, he gets or she gets worse grades. And even if they somehow magically end up having the same grades, the German kid still gets recommended for maybe like a better high school than the Muslim kid. And then even if the Muslim kid is like even so good that it even gets recommended for the good high school, still gets discriminated in the good high school. But even if they go through that hoop, then they go to university. Then in university, there's like a Nazi professor waiting. But even if they fight through that, they go through that, they have their CV, they send out the CV. Then we even have like, if it's a CV of like woman called Sandra Bauer or a woman called Meryem Öztürk, and it's the same picture, it's the same CV, everything's the same. Meryem Öztürk gets invited to less job interviews, and if Meryem Öztürk has a hijab, then it's even less job interviews and so on. So like everything's set up against you. And then in the end, they say, look at those fucking Muslims working in shitty like jobs and not getting anything done in their life. Well, why? Because you have to be like fucking superhuman to get shit done.
Of course, there is the well-known example of Uyghur Shahin, right, who is effectively a superhuman in a sense, right? This is the inventor of the BioNTech vaccine, now one of the richest people in Germany, and he was initially denied the recommendation to go to a gymnasium, so one of the better the academic high school. And we've talked about that on this pod before, but I think within this context of anti-Muslim racism, I think it's quite clear, right? Why else would this person who did very well in school and was always obsessed with studying and learning and has now, you know, been one of the people who saved the world during that awful period of the COVID-19 pandemic, has there been a shift in attitudes to it since that? Do you think there have been people who have accepted that Muslims have played an important role in German society, or is it still this kind of demonization because, you know, when I win, I'm German, when I lose, I'm an Ausländer?
Oh, definitely. It's the second part. I think it was going better for a while. And then since October last year, we landed in this like fucking time machine that took us back to the Bush years. And it's insane and honestly embarrassing and completely cringeworthy to see people who have like a few brain cells behave in the exact way, like all the stuff we saw in the Bush years, all the stuff where like the entire European continent was laughing at Americans saying, ha ha, how are they swallowing this bullshit about if you don't support our troops, you're un-American and we're fighting for freedom and for our values and ha ha, ha, how are you swallowing all these bullshit lies? And now we have Europeans swallowing the same bullshit lies. But let me just finish the point about homophobia, because I just wanted to say, like, Merkel and all those people, even if they do something, like, clearly homophobic, like being against gay marriage, they don't get called homophobic because they're just conservative Christians. They're still Democrats. But if a Muslim person is conservative, then they're automatically Islamists. Like, you can, just conservative.
Right.
You know?
So the language is misleading. Well, I want to kind of pick up one of your previous points with this one and ask about, Quiz for Palestine, for example. We've seen a huge wave across the world of queer people coming out for Palestinian human rights against violence. And what the main response that we've seen to that really is a group of often white, male, straight people, but also some queer ones, saying, well, you would get pushed off a building if you did that in Gaza.
That is the most cringy, embarrassing, ignorant, stupid, like, fuck them answer. Because this is exactly how anti-Muslim racism works. These people are dumb as fuck and they don't know shit. And the only thing they know about Muslims and Islam is stuff they see like somewhere on the internet. They hear something from a neighbor, then they hear something from a friend or a coworker, then they're like scrolling and they see some other shit, they see something on a meme and so on, and then they generalize this shit on all Muslims. This whole throwing gay people off a building shit happened once. ISIS did it. ISIS did that shit. Like I said, ISIS is such an extreme, marginal, tiny group that even Al-Qaeda is saying, we don't want to have anything to do with these motherfuckers. So like that's like the Muslim version of the Westboro Baptist Church or the Ku Klux Klan or something. And now we're acting as if 2 billion Muslims are the same as that.
But Hamas are Islamists, right?
Well, it depends on how you define Islamists, but yeah, political Islam and so on. But like Israel is bombing Lebanon now. Right now, as we speak, Lebanon is one of the most gay-friendly countries in the Arab and in the Muslim world. They have gay pride events. They have like gay clubs and everything. Super open country. And so what now? The same people who are saying, oh, queers for Palestine, what the fuck is wrong with you?
Yeah, self-hatred.
Yeah, they would also say, oh, you're defending Lebanon, but gays get pushed off a building in Lebanon. They don't.
No.
They don't.
I mean, I don't think there's actually any evidence that gays have been pushed off buildings in Gaza either, right? So, whereas there's plenty of evidence that people have died regardless of their sexuality, but that also includes gay people and women and children and men.
Yes.
Innocent civilians from all kinds. So is that part of this dehumanization that we see of Muslims, as you would put it?
Yeah, it's pinkwashing, it's dehumanization, it's grabbing at every straw and at every little shit you can because you know that you're defending the indefensible. Like, for example, a few days ago when we had like teenagers and their mothers burning to death in a hospital while still connected to the IV drip.
Very sad sights.
Like, insane. I mean, I work on genocide. My whole life revolves around genocide. I've been born into it. I don't remember a single point in my life, even as a little girl, where I didn't know what war is, what genocide is, what bombs are, what grenades are, what's the difference between a bomb and a grenade, and so on. I've known this shit all my life. And very few things shock me. And that thing shocked me. And I couldn't watch that video. I've watched so many things. I've watched so many executions. I've like things that if I even mention them, let alone showing the video to someone, if I even mention it, people will start crying or throwing up or stuff like that. I've seen some shit. But that video is like one of the most horrible things. And German media, the way they reported about it, of course, there was like a lot of bullshit going on and a lot of bullshit reporting. But one of the things that stuck out to me the most was a building that used to be used as a hospital. It was still a hospital.
Well, we saw people in hospital beds, so it clearly was still a hospital, right?
And even like, what kind of a fucking construct is this? Like a building that used to function as a hospital, used to be used as a hospital. This is the grasping at straws thing, because they know they're defending the indefensible. That's why you have to fucking talk about, but queer rights, blah, blah. Sorry. I mean, people are dying, including gay people. What the fuck are you talking about? What the fuck are you talking about in your cozy fucking hipster bar, typing on your like iPhone, talking shit while people are dying, people are being burned to death, people are getting amputations without anesthesia, people are giving birth, people are getting C-sections without anesthesia. Even this is a euphemism, because what's really happening is pregnant women are getting their stomachs cut open without anesthesia, and the babies are like getting like taken from their stomachs without anesthesia, without anything. That's what's happening when people say C-section without anesthesia. We got to talk about what's happening.
You're right. I think there's a tendency, even I would admit to it, to be fair, I don't watch some of the most graphic stuff because I find it too disturbing. But of course, there are many people who watch this stuff every day. And, you know, to an extent, they've been heavily politicized. Some have even been radicalized by this, by seeing the discrepancy as well between this awful mass violence. Of course, the New York Times recently reported on many, many cases of children being shot in the head by snipers in Gaza. And the language policing which happens in the German media. So you mentioned this image that went around the world, and someone who shared that image of someone in a hospital bed with the IV drip, someone who shared that was actually the vice president of the Bundestag, who is an SPD politician. They shared a post by Jewish Voice for Peace, and it said this is Zionism. Some pretty harsh political criticism there and a political point. But the big scandal in Germany was not that possibly German weapons were being used to bomb a hospital where people were attached to a drip, but the big scandal was that a SPD politician had shared a post by a Jewish group about this, criticizing this and Zionism. So, you know, the double standards on this stuff is just insane.
It's also double standards. Sorry for interrupting you, but I get very enraged. I don't know if it's noticeable, but it is double standards, but it's also, again, the grasping at straws and the Ablenkung, distraction. Yeah, they're just trying to distract, because what are you going to, if you talk about what really happened, what actually happened, it's indefensible. So we got to talk about something else. That's why we also talk about the Palestine demonstrations, and they make a lot of noise, and somebody threw paint at some local politician in Germany, like in Berlin. I'm sorry, if you think it's bad that Joe Cialo got some paint on him, what do you think about getting some blood on you? What do you think about getting a shrapnel on you? What do you think about getting a bullet on you? What do you think about getting fire on you, burning to death alive? I think that's bad. But I think a lot of people in Germany, they even have a word for it, because some people reflected on what's happening in this society, Wohlstandsverwahrlosung, because they're so living such cushy lives. They're so rich, one of the richest countries in the world. They have it so good that their brains don't work, and they start making everything about themselves. When people are dying in Gaza, but we have the special German relationship to Palestine, to Israel. When people are dying in Syria, but we have so many refugees here. When people are dying in Kosovo, but this is the first time that the German army is doing something like a foreign thing. When people are dying in Bosnia, again, we have so many Muslim refugees. It's not about you fuckers. It's not about you. And it's also not about, that's what the Queers for Palestine thing, it's very, very noticeable when people say shit like this, that they have this Wohlstandsverwahrlosung going on.
Wohlstandsverwahrlosung meaning kind of prosperity confusion, basically. Losing track because of how prosperous you are.
Yeah, like your brain rotting. It's like brain rot out of being hyper-privileged, like privilege rot. So when I see people talking about like, oh, but though they wouldn't have like a gay pride event allowed in Gaza. Well, even the gay people in Gaza don't give a fuck because they're trying not to burn to death. And you're talking about this.
It's actually interesting. At the start of the war, there was some screenshots going around from a website for kind of a gay map of some kind. I can't remember the name. There was some very heartbreaking messages on there because they were saying things like, this is the first place I kissed a boy. He's dead now. Stuff like that. So this kind of militant homo imperialism, I guess you could call it. In the case of Israel, it's often called homo nationalism. I want to pick up on your own experiences because, as you said, you were born into the Bosnian genocide. I think it's something that people don't know enough about, and I'm going to be honest with you, I did not know enough about it until I went to Bosnia a few years ago. I did a little tour around Sarajevo, the war tour, the siege tour. A lot of things stood out to me, but of course one thing that stood out is how helpless the people were, because I just heard the term siege and I didn't realize that Sarajevo is surrounded by mountains, so actually people were kind of sitting ducks for murder. I wanted to ask about, did its anti-Muslim racism also play a role in this genocide, in the Bosnian genocide, which many people just view as sort of ethnic Balkan tensions, right?
Yeah, that's exactly like the wrong narrative is like, oh, these like crazy Balkan cave people, they have ancient hatreds and like they just all started killing each other, everyone against everyone because they're such nationalists. But in reality, if you look at the wars that happened, first Serbia attacked Kosovo, then Serbia attacked Slovenia, then Serbia attacked Croatia, then Serbia attacked Bosnia, then Serbia attacked Kosovo again until it was stopped by NATO after 10 years of attacking, like of wars of aggression and genocides and so on, and after nothing worked. And the only thing that like got out of this line is that also 1 year after Serbia attacked Bosnia, Croatia also attacked Bosnia because they wanted to divide the country amongst themselves. And the best way to understand the Bosnian war of aggression and the genocide is through a quote of Momčilo Mandić. He was, maybe even still is, if he's not like a pensioner now or like retired, like a politician in the parliament of Serbia. And during one of the many meetings they had where they discussed dividing Bosnia among themselves, he said the left side of the Neretva River to the Croats, the right side of the river to the Serbs, and the Muslims down the river. So kill them, throw their bodies into the river. That's what they wanted to do in Bosnia, and that's what happened. But it was all the time being shown as like, oh, these crazy Balkan people fighting among each other. We weren't fighting among each other. Bosnia doesn't have a problem with Slovenia. Slovenia doesn't have a problem with Kosovo. Kosovo doesn't have a problem with Croatia. It was fucking Milosevic, one of the big monsters of the 20th century, attacking everybody else and Croatia getting in on the action for a bit. But the way it was reported, Javier Baulo is a famous Spanish photojournalist. He's the guy, if you know the famous picture of the body of a dead black refugee on a beach in Spain and two Spanish tourists just like sunbathing next to the corpse. So he was in Bosnia during the war and he said, no matter how many times I told my editors, the army of Bosnia is a multi-ethnic, multi-religious, anti-fascist army. It's not about religion. It's just their country was attacked. They have to defend it. They have to defend it against genocide. They have Serb generals in the army who are anti-fascist. No matter how many times I tried to explain it, they insisted on writing Muslim army, Muslim army. And why were they writing Muslim army instead of at least Bosniak army? You know, if you had something like this going on in Italy, you wouldn't be like, oh, the Catholic army. You would at least say the Italian army. But it was like complete reduction of everything we are to their Muslims. And in the words of François Mitterrand, the leader of France at the time, it would be unnatural to have a Muslim country in Europe. So they had to stop it. And in the words of some British diplomats, which they told to Bill Clinton at the time, that the genocide is a necessary and realistic restoration of Christian Europe. And they said, let the Serbs finish the job. The job being extermination of my family and everyone I know and love through concentration camps, death camps, rape camps, siege, massacres, and so on. And rape camps, let me just explain this, in the ideology of Greater Serbia and of Serb nationalism, which has existed for centuries, it's nothing new.
Chetnik ideology.
Yeah, like they were Nazi collaborators in World War II, and in the genocide in World War II against Bosnian Muslims, like more of my family members were killed then than in the 90s. But like Mladic, when he was walking into Srebrenica, he said, finally, after 600 years, the time has come for revenge against the Turks.
Exactly.
The fucking Ottoman Empire, which we have nothing to do with.
Right. So, and of course, when I have spoken to Serbs, they actually, a lot of the time, refuse to use the term Bosniak, which is the widely accepted term for Muslims of Bosnia. It's kind of semi-ethnic grouping, some people would put it as opposed to, Bosnian Croats, Bosnian Serbs, you have the Bosniaks, which are about 50% of the country, for people who don't know.
More than 50%.
More than 50%.
And also, I wouldn't say semi-ethnic, it's ethnic because... you can be born a Bosniak and be an atheist. I know some Hare Krishna Bosniaks and so on. I mean, the way we explain it is Bosnian Muslims, but you have Bosnian Muslims who are like Afro-Bosnians, Sudanese. We have a big Sudanese community or Palestinian community. Or like we have people who converted to Islam.
So basically, it's understood that kind of Serbs who are usually Orthodox are Serbs, Croats are Catholic. That's one of the main divides, as well as some linguistic and ethnic differences. But Bosniaks have their own identity kind of refused and ignored by many people in the region because they are seen as non-European because they're Muslim, right?
Yep. Yeah, and it was super clear. They even said it in their own words. We had an arms embargo during the war. So, like in contrast to Ukraine, I mean, I totally support Ukraine because it's a war of aggression. When someone comes to your house to shoot you, they're going to shoot back. But Ukraine is getting armed. Bosnia not only was not getting armed, we had an arms embargo. We weren't even allowed to buy weapons. And all the weapons that somehow we got or like made ourselves or like, I don't know, maybe some hunters had some rifles left or whatever, like all the weapons we had to defend the entire enclave of Srebrenica were worth less than one single Javelin rocket that Ukraine uses like a shitload of. So, I mean, nothing against them again, but like that's what we were.
And do you think the fact that Bosniaks are Muslim played a role in this different perception in the West? Because the whole
they were saying it openly. They were saying it's a restoration of Christian Europe. It would be unnatural to have a Muslim country in Europe, even though we already existed at the time. Mitterrand, who said this shit. Like the entire genocide happened when Bosnia was already independent, fully recognized, a UN member state. And then Mitterrand was saying to the then Prime Minister of Bosnia, not every village in Europe can be independent. Well, we were already independent. And our Prime Minister was like, of course, not every village in Europe can be independent, but if we're talking about Bosnia, Bosnia is a country that has more than a millennium of history. It's a country that is older than France. Bitch. He didn't say the bitch part, but every time I say this, I get so aggressive.
I think Srebrenica is very interesting because it is one of the few genocides which has been recognized by the World Court. Recognized internationally and legally as a genocide, right? And you have done a lot of work with the Srebrenica Memorial, is it? Or yeah,
in Borčak, the Genocide Memorial.
The Genocide Memorial, on how to report on this, what people get wrong. Now, this question of genocide is something that has become a huge topic in the last year. Many people, including some scholars of genocide, have said that it looks like Israel is committing genocide in Palestine. including Omar Bartov most recently on Swiss radio. There's also people who disagree with that, of course. So what would you say people need to understand about genocide, how that relates to Srebrenica, and how does that relate to Gaza as well?
Oh, I don't know where to start. There's so many things to say here. First of all, most people don't even know what genocide is.
What is genocide?
Well, it's not lots of killing, but it's, to put it in like the most simple terms from the UN Genocide Convention, it's one or more acts committed with the intent to exterminate a group of people. So it can be killing, but it can also be like forced sterilization. And it can also be creating circumstances calculated to bring about the physical destruction of the group. For example, man-made famines or destroying the medical system, attacking hospitals, stuff like this, and so on and so on. So there's like a list of things that can be methods of genocide. And this is very clear. And this is what people should understand, because we had, for example, like we have now the genocide against Uyghurs in China, where forced sterilization is the main genocide method. And you don't have to be like a genius or a biologist or anything to understand that if you sterilize almost every Uyghur woman, there's not going to be another generation of Uyghurs.
Have they really sterilized almost every Uyghur woman?
They haven't, but that's the goal. But, you know, journalists see, oh, I don't see like a pile of dead bodies, so that's not genocide. That's not how it works. You can see a pile of dead bodies. For example, the bombing of Germany in World War II, almost 500,000 people were killed, but the goal of the Allies was not to exterminate the German nation. It was to stop Hitler. And of course, you can say that maybe the bombing of Dresden was too intense, or maybe this was too bad, or that was too bad, and so on. But the intent behind it was not to kill every single German that exists anywhere.
And I think that's one of the tough points about genocide, which is why people like Dirk Moses are even skeptical of the term, who's the editor of the Genocide Journal, because it's not just about the intent, it's about proving the intent.
Yeah.
And how can you do
Which
that?
is bullshit.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I think genocide is like way too gate-kept, way too strict. So I have to like roll back a little bit. So genocide, we know the definition now. And who is responsible for declaring that something is or isn't genocide? People think it's the courts. It's not the courts. The only genocides that were ever declared as such by international courts ever were Rwanda, Bosnia, Srebrenica, and Cambodia. Starting in 1999, so 25 years ago with Rwanda, like, are you going to tell me there was no genocide ever until 99 or 95 in that case, 94 in that case? And the last one was Cambodia, was proven in 2018. It happened in the 70s. What did Cambodians do? Did they say, oh, some shit happened here, but we don't know because no court allowed us, like the white Western man didn't allow us to call it genocide? No, they built the Tuol Sleng Genocide Memorial.
Right.
And then in 2018, after so many decades, they finally proved it. But if you went by international courts, then you would have to deny every other genocide ever, including the Holocaust, including the Porajmos, including like fucking
Porajmos
everything.
was the killing of Roma and Sinti people by the Nazis.
Yes, yeah. Which some people also say is like a part of the Holocaust. So like it's not the job of courts, because courts don't fucking do it in most cases. It's the job of genocide scholars, genocide experts. If they say this and this, such and such, is a genocide, then that's what it is. I mean, of course, there has to be some type of like agreement, consensus. You know, it's with scientific stuff, it's always a measure, like you have to find a balance. There's always people who disagree, just like there's like climate scientists who say that climate change isn't happening, you know?
Yeah.
You have genocide scholars who deny the genocide of the Tutsis in Rwanda. You know, people like that exist.
And that's also a very clear case because it happened so quickly. There's also a bit of a tendency to deny the Bosnian genocide on the left, though, isn't there?
Yeah, because people don't have enough brain cells, so they get their worldviews like in a package, like on sale, you know? You buy one, you get two for free. You buy hating the US, you get loving Russia in the same package. So, that's tankies. Tankies are the ones doing that, and it's a shame.
Well,
because,
Noam Chomsky, for example.
Fuck him.
He's on record for doubting, at least, that what happened at Srebrenica was genocide.
For denying it. He also straight up denied it several times. He also denied the Cambodian genocide. He was actually actively writing to editors of US media while the genocide was going on to get them to stop reporting on it and stop calling it a genocide.
That's so strange, because also he's come out to say, point out that Pol Pot was actually partially backed by the West during this time. So
yeah, but he was also partially backed by Noam Chomsky, who tried to downplay his shit.
Interesting.
I mean, it's just, the guy's built his career, like, he's a linguist. And people say, oh, you should be grateful because he's talking about so many things that other people don't talk about. Other people do talk about it, but they don't get listened to because they're not an old white professor, even if his professorship has nothing to do with genocide,
True.
But I got this argument from tankies saying, oh, you should be grateful because he talked about like East Timor and shit. There was people from East Timor talking about East Timor as well. Just because they don't get listened to doesn't mean we have to keep pumping up and like putting on a pedestal this old white dude who did more damage than he did good. It's a shame because I saw one of my neighbors getting kidnapped in the middle of the street, in the middle of the day, being brought to Guantanamo, tortured for years without even getting charged. I fucking hate the government of the US. But I also fucking hate other governments who did bullshit. I don't need to reduce my brain to 2 brain cells to think, fuck US imperialism, fuck what they did in Iraq, fuck what they did in Afghanistan, fuck all the drone bombings, fuck Guantanamo and Abu Ghraib. So now I'm going to love Russia and China, and now I'm going to be like, NATO imperialism destroying Milosevic. Yeah. Fuck Milosevic.
I have noticed there is a bit of a trend among some of the left who would put a list of, I think things which are right to criticize, the invasion of Iraq, Afghanistan, a number of others, and then they would put Serbia in there as well, right? I think people don't really understand actually what was happening in Kosovo. I mean, maybe you can explain for that, because a lot of people hear NATO bombing of Yugoslavia. They think Yugoslavia was this socialist country. But of course, at that point, it was not even Yugoslavia. It was the rump state of Serbia and Montenegro who were committing genocide on neighbors through funding ethnic-backed militias.
And through their own, like, for example, in Srebrenica, there wasn't even militias. It was like regular units of the Serbian Ministry of Interior.
Wow.
Funded by the state under direct control of Milosevic.
And so then what about Kosovo? Was the West
Kosovo,
wrong
it was
to
also
invade?
the police of Serbia, the police of Serbia and the army of Serbia. So everybody's talking about Black Lives Matter. We support Black Lives Matter. Of course we do. We support it not only in the US, but also in Brazil and in other places where black people get killed by the police in like unjust cases. And
including Germany.
And in Germany, where it's black people, and it's also Muslims, it's also refugees, and also, in a lot of cases, people with mental health issues that get killed by the police unjustly, or burned to death even. So we're against police brutality anywhere it's happening. But then in Kosovo, where you have police officers of the state, I mean, Kosovo was part of Serbia at the time. So you have police of your own state coming to your house, raping your children, your young daughters, in front of your eyes, killing people, raping people, torturing people, building mass graves. You had like a truck full of the corpses of Albanian civilians, like have an accident on the road and then slide into off the road, and then they discovered the corpses that were being driven to Belgrade. Belgrade is like they have mass graves of Albanians, people who are still today searching to get even a single bone of their loved ones so they can bury them, so they can have some closure, but they don't get it because the mass graves are in Serbia and they don't have access to it. I mean,
Albanians, of course, were the other ethnic group, non-Serbian in Kosovo, and are mostly
and the
Muslim.
Majority. I mean, we have this on record, also not just in Kosovo, in eastern Bosnia. We have this on record that, for example, the fucking psychopath teachers that were beating my mom and all her other like school kids in elementary school were sent from Belgrade. They were sending people from Serbia and from Montenegro, ethnic Serbs, to go to Eastern Bosnia to get into positions of power and to change the ethnic makeup. And they use it now as an... also, we were like banned from saying that we're Bosniaks, like you mentioned before. And now they say, oh, look at the census from before the genocide or before the war, they say. I don't see any Bosniaks in that census. And now you're saying Bosniaks were killed. Bitch, you don't see Bosniaks because we were not allowed to say that we exist. Like just in the 70s, like 30 years after Yugoslavia started, and even more years if you count like the kingdom of Yugoslavia and so on, we got the right to call ourselves Muslims. Muslims is not what we are. I mean, most of us are Muslims, but Muslims is also like some random guy in Malaysia.
Yeah, or Albanians as well. They were allowed to be an ethnic group, but the
and we
Bosniaks weren't. So do you think that this is a Bosnia-specific problem? I mean, I think yes, but what about, how does this fit into the wider picture about Muslim identity? People being kind of grouped together as part of one big happy caliphate or something, when actually it's a very large and diverse religion.
Well, I think it just proves that white privilege, if you're Muslim, is like the opposite of privilege. Because there's a few Muslim countries that are left alone. You know, if you don't have oil, if you're not like in some geostrategic bullshit, you're going to be left alone.
No one cares about Indonesia, right? It's, I think, the fourth biggest, most populous country in the world. We never hear
and they have
about
the best punk scene in the world. Indonesian punk. But like, you know, you're going to be left alone in some cases if you're Muslim. But if you're a Muslim country in Europe, like, it's not happening because then you're seen as the enemy within. And then you're getting attacked all the time because, like I said, I always call it, you know, when I see the phrase European cooperation, I don't think about like some EU or like Erasmus shit and so on. For me personally, European cooperation means the genocide against Bosnian Muslims. I've been working professionally on this topic like for over 15 years, and I've been working on it for the rest of my life by living through it and by getting to know it and by researching it. They were happy about it. It was the restoration of Christian Europe. Let the Serbs finish the job. It would be unnatural to have a Muslim country, and so on and so forth.
So is anti-Muslim racism genocidal? Because
of course it is. This is also a big problem when people would never say, I know this dude, he's a Holocaust denier, but he's not anti-Semitic. You wouldn't say that. That's ridiculous. Of course, if someone is a Holocaust denier, of course, he or she is anti-Semitic. But if someone is treating anti-Muslim genocides like shit or denying them or minimizing them, then it's not racist. It's not anti-Muslim racism. People have to understand that tanky dude that's saying, oh, this is just like anti-communist propaganda, China didn't do anything wrong, he's a racist. That nice Serbian colleague you have that's saying, oh, you know, crimes on all sides and war is complicated, she's a racist. The people who are saying, oh, but Hamas is having command centers and blah, blah, they are racists.
So why is it racist if Islam is a religion and not a race? I know you've written on this before.
Because nothing is a race, because race is a social construct. And racists know this full well. The NPD, the German neo-Nazi party, years ago already published a pamphlet saying, let's not talk about race anymore, let's talk about culture. But the way that they see culture is that it's like inherent and unchangeable. So, for example, you can have a Roma person and an Indian person who look exactly the same. You can't tell the difference between them. But the Roma person will get a different type of racism than the Indian person, even though Roma, like centuries ago, came from northern India. And that's also a type of cultural racism, just like anti-Muslim racism is. And they have their concepts to make it seem as if we have this inherent to us. So, for example, they take taqiyya. Taqiyya is, you know, because Islam at its core, and especially the way it's like lived in Bosnia, it's a chill religion. We're very chill. And we have this concept of taqiyya, which means if somebody is telling you, convert or I'm going to kill you, then you can say, yeah, I totally converted, man. Just leave me alone. I'm like the most Christian dude ever, and you can just pretend you converted, but you don't have to be. That's a chill thing,
Interesting.
You save your life. But racists took this concept and turned it into Muslims are lying all the time and they're pretending all the time and they're all uncivilized and they're all homophobes and they're all violent and they're all Islamists. And if you meet one that isn't, he or she is, but they're just pretending. They say about me that I'm pretending, I'm doing taqiyya, and I'm pretending, but I'm actually an Islamist, like a turquoise-haired punk vegan feminist. But I'm an Islamist because their brains, like their whole ideology falls apart if we're not violent Islamists and so on. And it's so that's in some cases. In other cases, it is like straight up biological.
It sounds racist, actually, right? To call you an Islamist or a secret Islamist. You don't.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And I mean, like it also is biological, not only cultural racism, but also this like old biological type when it comes to Bosnian Muslims, because in the ideology of Serb nationalists, we're not humans. We are, quote, genetically deformed material. And so...
Where does that quote come from?
From Biljana Plavšić, who was like the number 2 in the command of Republika Srpska. So she was like the vice president.
And the Republika Srpska was the Serbian ethnic breakaway region of Bosnia-Herzegovina.
Yeah, so they declared their own state.
And what I find shocking is that, after declaring the state, after committing the Srebrenica genocide and arguably the genocide in general in Bosnia, they then managed to keep half of the country, right?
Yeah, because, I mean, it's imagine if Ukraine wasn't treated as Ukraine's getting attacked and, it doesn't even matter, even if they have Nazis and so on, you can't just go and shoot people. So imagine if that instead was treated as, these crazy Eastern Europeans, these crazy Slavic cave people, they all just hate each other, Russians and Ukrainians and Belarusians and the Krim Tatars, and they all just hate each other. And it's like an ethnic hatred. So we, the enlightened West, are going to get there and we're going to force them, by threatening the president of Ukraine that NATO is going to bomb him. We're going to force them to sign the shittiest peace agreement in the history of humanity, saying that Ukraine is not going to be a normal country, but it's going to have 3 presidents, 1 Ukrainian, 1 Russian, 1 Belarusian. And also we're going to have like a de facto dictator who's going to be always non-Ukrainian, always someone from the West. Let's start with a British guy. And that's what happened in Bosnia. We had 3 fucking presidents and 2 of them hate the country.
Right, yeah. It's a very strange system. When I actually was there and did some reporting there while there was an election on, and getting my head around it was not easy, to be honest with you, the political system, especially because you have to have 1 Serb, 1 Croat, 1 Bosniak, right? And then actually that excludes other people, including Jews, Roma, and then there's the question of how do you define it? Because you're not actually really allowed to define it like who is ethnically who. It's based on self-definition. So it's a pretty, I think it's understandable that you would call it a pretty crappy peace deal. It doesn't seem to have liberal democracy. It's like a kind of bizarre ethnocracy, which we don't see anywhere else in the world, which is intended to keep the peace and the constitutional order. But
not intended to keep the peace. It's intended to keep Muslims from having their own country, because we are like the biggest part of the country. Even those things like more than 50%, that's over 10 years old. In those 10 years, Croatia got into the EU. A lot of people that are Bosnian Catholics that got Croatian passports based on being Catholic. If we had like a normal country, 1 vote, like 1 person, 1 vote, like South Africa had to fucking fight for during apartheid, we have to fight for it, but they won't let us have it because Muslims are just the largest group in the country. And like somehow they don't get it in their heads that we are normal people and we wouldn't all vote for like fucking, I don't know, Ayatollah whatever. We don't even have Ayatollahs.
Ayatollah Borčak.
Honestly, Ayatollah Borčak. I would be.
I would vote for you. I would vote for you.
Thank you. I would ban meat. I would ban fur production.
I think you would that would be your first and last decree, because the hordes of the nation would unite from across all groups to save Cevapcici.
But that's the good thing about being Ayatollah or like a dictator or something, because I would just kill him.
I think the power of Bosnian love for Cevapi is stronger than your powers. But I want to come back to what you said about this strange dictator. Now, in Bosnia, their highest power isn't one of the three presidents, is it? It's someone called the High Representative, which to me sounds like a comic book supervillain or something. So,
he is.
And right now it's a German, and he's a particularly bad one, Christian Schmidt. Why don't you tell us a bit about him?
Yeah, he's a German from the CSU, so like an even more strict Christian party than Merkel's party. They're like in union, but that's like the even stricter part. He is a member of a group called Kameradentruppe der Gebirgsjäger, which was founded by a Nazi war criminal convicted in Nuremberg.
Wow.
They never distanced themselves from this guy, and the whole purpose of this group is like to honor pilots of the German army, Luftwaffe or whatever.
Yeah.
Gebirgsjäger. Also, he tried to, when he was like a politician in Germany still, he tried to rehabilitate one of the big Nazi war criminals, one of the guys who bombed Guernica, actually. I didn't even know that Germans were involved. And like he changed the Bosnian election law because this high representative has the power to just force laws into existence in Bosnia and to make other laws disappear. He has the power to let parliament go and so on. So like he's basically a dictator. So we're not even ruling ourselves. We have a German far-right Christian dude.
I'm sure he would just debate being far-right, but I think he's definitely
far-right.
Conservative, very conservative.
Yeah, see, there we have the thing, because if someone was having exactly his same positions as a Muslim and tried to rehabilitate some ISIS people and claim that they're not war criminals and so on, would we be saying like, oh, he's not an Islamist though?
That's an interesting point.
He's just conservative.
He's accused of being very close to the right-wing nationalist Croatians in Bosnia.
He's super friends with them. Dragan Čović, the leader of the HDZ party, who is like the sister party of the CDU, the Christian Democrats.
Yeah.
Merkel was even traveling to Croatia to campaign for them. And then it was a scandal because they were playing like neo-Nazi music. And Merkel's spokesperson was like, oh, she didn't know. And I believe that she didn't recognize the songs. But like, if you're going to a HDZ election thing, you better believe they're going to be playing neo-Nazi music. I mean, Croatia, the good thing about Croatia and why they get less hate than Serbia is because, you know, a chunk of Croatian society has admitted that what their government did in the 90s was wrong. It wasn't okay to attack Bosnia. They've even had several presidents who admitted it, several presidents of Croatia who were social democrats, who were like visiting sites of massacres committed against Bosnian Muslims by the Croat forces and so on. So, you know,
they've had a bit of Aufarbeitung.
Yeah, a little bit, you know. Serbia, on the other hand, had almost none. You count, like, Belgrade has almost 2 million people living in it. And then when there's activists calling to remember Srebrenica on the anniversary, last year I counted 17 people. 17 people. In a city of almost 2 million people.
Wow.
And those 17 also came from other cities to be there. So it's disgusting. But back to the topic of Schmidt. So like he changed the election law on election day, an hour after the polls were closed, retroactively. And he changed it in a way that basically writes into the law that the Croat nationalists have to have power. Because he changed it so that like the places where they get a lot of votes are like more important.
Right.
And does anyone give a fuck about the fact that in Bosnia, like one of the great Bosnian leaders, the like president of the Jewish community of Bosnia, who is a Holocaust survivor who was born into the Holocaust in a concentration camp, and who organized pro-Palestinian rallies, actually. The first protest that I was at, he organized it and held a speech. He doesn't have the right to become president in Bosnia, even though I would love him to be the president of my country. Because I'm not some Islamist that only wants a Muslim. I would love to vote for this Jewish man. But he doesn't have the right to do it. Schmidt could change that, but he's not changing that. Does he get accused of anti-Semitism? No. I get accused of it because I'm saying, I know what genocide is, I know what war is, I've seen suffering, and I don't want other kids, because I was a kid at the time, I don't want other children to grow up and get traumatized for life. Because I'm talking here like a maniac and shaking and all that. I'm not doing it because I'm a freak. I'm doing it because I have survivor's guilt. And because almost every day of my life, I'm asking myself, why am I alive? And other children in my city that would have been my best friends maybe, or maybe they would have been some bitch I hate or like whatever, but like they would have been part of my life. They would have gone to my school, but they were shot in the head by a sniper. Like children in Gaza are getting shot in the head by a sniper now. Like, I can't deal with this shit. And I'm seeing it happen again, and I don't want it to happen again. And then I'm accused of being anti-Semitic, but some fucking Christian Democrat, right-wing guy who wanted to rehabilitate a Nazi, who is in a, like, Verein, like an association founded by a Nuremberg convicted Nazi war criminal and so on, who doesn't let Jewish people be president or be part of the lower chamber of parliament in Bosnia, he is not getting accused of it. It's exhausting. It's exhausting. Germany is exhausting. Vučić, the now current president of Serbia, because while they were bombing Sarajevo, during the siege of Sarajevo, they were on all the mountains around the city, and one of the places where they were bombing the city from was a Jewish cemetery, one of the oldest Jewish cemeteries in Europe. Because again, when the Spanish anti-Semites forced all the Jews and the Muslims out of Spain, my family on my mother's side was also forced out of Spain during that time, and they came to live in the Ottoman Empire and in Bosnia. And that's how we got like 96% of our Jewish community, Sephardic people.
I wasn't aware of that. There is one other German connection to Bosnia I wanted to discuss, and that is what's known as the Grand Mufti. This is someone who was the leader of Jerusalem, appointed by the British.
But what does he have to do with Bosnia?
So what happened later on is that he was employed by the Nazis to recruit soldiers. Now, Germans, and particularly German Ultradeutsch Zionists, use this as an example of why Muslims are secretly Nazis. So Arabs are seen as Nazi collaborators. They often point to the Grand Mufti. And I think one of the only pieces of evidence that they actually have is something like 45, maybe a bit more, Bosnian soldiers joined up. But from what I've heard, they actually resigned very quickly and went to fight with the partisans, who ended up destroying the Nazi threat in the Balkans, and I think were the only place where it was an autonomous army rather than the Allies that actually fought out the Nazis.
I mean, this is again one of those things where they're grasping at straws and at the same time proving that they don't even have like two brain cells communicating. It's just stupidity, ignorance, fucking dumb people. If they ever in their life got off their asses in their fucking mom's basements where they're like trolling on their keyboard and went to Bosnia and looked at the many sites we have dedicated to people killed by the Nazis, they would see Muslim names there. They would see that anti-fascists hanged in the streets of my city, on every single tree, corpses. Their names were Mustafa, Muhammad, and so on and so forth. You don't even have to be a genius. You can see it. You can know that my city, Sarajevo, and Bosnia as a whole was like liberated from the Nazis by the 16th Muslim Brigade of the Partisans. It was a Muslim brigade that fought and killed the Nazis, and also some of them were killed, to liberate the country from Nazis. Did we have collaborators? Yes, of course, everybody had collaborators. But do I see, if there's like some shit going on in France or a terror attack in France, do I see somebody saying, well, fuck the French because they had Nazi collaborators? No. I only see it when it's about Palestine or about Bosnia or about
Arab
India. I
countries.
also saw it.
Yeah.
I also saw it about India. During COVID, I was like,
It's rarely about Germany, which I find really
yeah,
weird
because they're
here.
trying to outsource their guilt.
I think the premise in itself
Yeah,
is flawed.
yeah.
So
And also when you think about the Bosnian collaborators, they didn't even exist until the Holocaust in Bosnia was almost over. Because first there was the genocide of the Serb Nazi collaborators, the Chetniks, against the Bosnian Muslims. These are people who didn't know how to read or write, who didn't have like Google to see what is this Hitler guy talking about. They just heard, oh, there's someone, like you can join this army. If you join this army, you're going to have weapons and so on. Of course, there were probably some people who were ideologues who loved Hitler and the Nazis and so on. I don't want to downplay this. But like it was like, I think, 3,000 people or something
Yeah.
out of the entire Bosnian, like...
But what I've heard, because this story about the Bosnian Waffen-SS makes its rounds online quite a lot, and what I've heard is that actually, Bosnia a lot of Bosnians fought for Austria-Hungary in the First World War. They thought it was kind of like that. They thought it would help them defend against the Serbs, and most of them ended up running away and joining partisans after being
There's
deployed
a
to France.
monument in France dedicated to this Bosnian SS division because they deserted and fought against the Nazis and
Exactly.
helped liberate France.
And that part of the story never gets
And
told.
again, France, I mean, I don't even want to downplay any of this. Fuck all Nazi collaborators, But I think we have to see if it's because the world doesn't revolve around Germany. And people in fucking India 70 years ago maybe weren't like reading German news to know exactly what was happening, but were thinking, oh, these people are fighting the British, let's join them. Doesn't mean that they weren't asshole, doesn't mean that they didn't do horrible shit and that from now our perspective we can judge them, but we have to have this in mind. And even if like they were totally collaborating, even if like half of the Muslims in Bosnia were collaborating and nobody was fighting against the Nazis, which ain't true, but even if, why is this brought up? But it's never brought up when shit happens in non-Muslim countries.
Or even, indeed, in Germany itself.
In Germany itself, yeah. Or like when something happens in the Netherlands, oh, they had Nazi collaborators. What is the point? I don't see any point except racism. And like you said, in Germany itself, they're trying to outsource. Like now the biggest Nazis were the Muslims and not the Germans themselves. Like, it's so exhausting and it's so cringeworthy. It's cringeworthy. Germans travel around the world and then they complain, oh, people still think we're Nazis. And they think it's because of World War II. No, it's not because of World War II. It's because there's this gigantic vibe. You just feel it in the atmosphere that so many Germans, of course not all, but so many think that they're better than the rest of the world. And you feel it in the way they interact with you, in the way they like try to lecture you. You know how many times a German tried to lecture me about my country and about genocide? You know how many times, like, for example, I'm like an expert on this shit, And they tell me, yeah, so we can't say what's happening in Gaza is genocide because it wasn't said by an international court. And I'm saying, like, the fact that an international court even is considering it is a gigantic thing.
And declared it plausible, right?
Yeah. So that's a gigantic thing. And then they start saying, yeah, but you can't say, you can't connect Israel to genocide. It's anti-Semitic. Okay, so am I supposed to deny the genocide in Rwanda and the genocide in Bosnia as well? Because Israel was supplying weapons to the killers there. It's well documented, it's proven. So now I'm not allowed to say anything that connects the Israeli government to any genocide. So now I have to deny reality. Like, this for me is anti-Semitism. Because during the siege of Sarajevo, most of the medicine in Sarajevo, was coming through 2 Jewish pharmacies organized by the Jewish community of Bosnia. I will never, in my entire life, whatever happens on this fucking earth, never will I hate Jewish people, especially Bosnian Jewish people who are like, they are like us. They are us. We are one country. Never in my life will I have anything against them. But those same people, those Bosnian Jews, were being bombed, by bombs supplied by Israel, sometimes even made in Israel. If you go to the machine engineering university in Sarajevo, there's one on display. And also there was an Israeli humanitarian worker, an aid worker, who saw Serbs with like Israeli guns. He recognized it because he's Israeli. And then there was a Israeli Holocaust professor who researched it and who sued the state of Israel to get more information on this. These were like Jewish great people who proved that the fucking government of Israel was supplying weapons during an international arms embargo, illegally supplying weapons to a genocidal state and training the genocidal killers. And I'm not going to pretend that that didn't happen, because like the uncle, like the grandkid of some Nazi didn't go to therapy enough.
This is something I bring up quite a lot. Deutschland braucht Therapie. I think also one thing I have, Germany needs therapy. One thing I have seen a number of otherwise quite serious people say is, oh, trust me, Germans know about genocide. Like they'll know if it's genocide. It's like, we're not asking
which perspective.
Exactly. We're not asking how to commit a genocide. We're asking how to stop or recognize a genocide, which Germany quite famously did not do. So thank you very much, Melina Borčak. It's been great having you on Mad in Germany. It seems like you really are a little bit mad in Germany.
And mad at Germany.
And mad at Germany, maybe. So stay mad.